This is Robert Nunez, and Robert, tell me what the organization is that you're representing right now.
I am a student volunteer with the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property, a international Catholic movement that fights for moral values.
Okay, one of the things that I noticed when I was reading your literature here, that you have something like defending a higher law, and you talk about, well, we must resist the same-sex marriage and the homosexual movement, but we also talked about the issue of no-fault divorce.
Yes.
Tell me what you just said about that.
Well, my argument, my knowledge in this area is limited as a student volunteer, but I would say that the same sexual revolution that exploded in the 1960s that brought us homosexual marriage also brought us the concept of no-fault divorce. And I think they are very strongly correlated because they are based on the same spirit of pride and sensuality. No-fault divorce is a product of sensuality. And when I was young, my family ran a daycare when I was growing up very young. And I knew many children growing up who came from families that were the result was from a no-fault divorce where the parents divorced and the mother couldn't take care of the child and work at the same time, so the child had to be put into daycare, and we would take care of the child. We would do our best to give the child a good, a good environment to be in. But when I was growing up, I witnessed so many children that the trauma that they would go through having these divorces in their families. And so that first-hand experience marked me very deeply, and it made me see how no-fault divorce is not just wrong in a theological way, in a moral sense, but also the trauma that it does, the trauma that it causes to children is irreparable. And many of the problems that we have in today's youth are from these divorced, broken families. The whole school shootings that we have and everything, many of the school shooters, one thing they have in common is they come from families where the parents are broken up, they don't have a father in their life, so they're frustrated, they're empty, they're disillusioned. So if we don't address the whole issue of divorce that is causing families to be broken, we're going to continue to have problems in our youth today.
So one of the things that people try to say is that children are resilient. Children are happy if their parents are happy. So if their parents get divorced and it makes them happy, children will be happy about this. And children are resilient. I mean, they will power their way through it. But what you're saying appears to contradict these things that people say to convince themselves. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, what I would say is that, yes, children are resilient, but they're much more affected by these things than we take them to believe. Children are very impressionable. From a very young age, they are always observing what their parents are doing. If you want to see how a child comes today, how he turns out today, safely you can see how the parents raise that child. They see everything their parents do and they learn from their parents. So yes, they will be able to, if a child has to deal with a divorce, they'll have to, learn how to deal with that to the best that they can, but it's still going to cause emotional, psychological trauma that's going to continue even as into their adults. And for example, I knew this one boy, and I was good friends with him growing up, who came from a family where the father just broke up from the mother and left the family. And he loved his father. He had a huge love for the father, and seeing his father go away, it devastated him so much that when he first came to my family daycare, he didn't want to talk. He was alone. He was retreated in his own corner. He didn't want to do anything. He was just the saddest. It was the saddest sight ever you'd ever see. And it was only through many years of therapy, psychological therapy and things like that, that he was able to get over it and lead a normal life again. But the fact that children are resilient doesn't mean they can still be affected by these sorts of things, and it affects them much more deeply than we take for granted.
I think what you said, though, is it was not an easy fix. It was years.
It was years.
Years.
Years of hell.
There's a book that was written by Layla Miller. It's called Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak Out. And that theme comes up again and again and again.
Yes.
25 years later, 30 years later, they're still struggling with the divorce of their parents. Yes. And most people would say, well, get over it already. But that seems to be an unfair burden to lay upon children. Children have a right to both parents in an intact family. And when you deprive them of that, when you take it away from them, you confuse them. You've taught them that the most sacred of all relationships, the most precious of all relationships, can be easily destroyed for any reason, for no reason. It
cheapens the value of marriage and of a family life.
Right, and it causes confusion in the child's mind. How do I live with the fact that these two people that were supposed to be there for me my entire life have gone separate ways, and somehow this is my good?
And what does it teach the children too? I remembered one more thing I'd like to point out about the connection between no-fault divorce and homosexuality. There are many cases, if you read about, so people who decide to come out as homosexual, they decide to embrace the homosexual lifestyle. If you read many of their stories, especially stories of people who were once homosexual and decided to leave their homosexual lifestyle and pursue a normal lifestyle, many of them say that what led them to becoming a homosexual was they came from a broken family, a family where a father was not present in their lives. They're talking about the case of like male homosexuals, and because of the trauma that they received from that, the way that they tried to compensate not having a father growing up was by seeking out male friends in a sexual manner. I remember reading I read a recent interview that was carried out in the National Catholic Reporter, or no, not the Reporter, the National Catholic Register, where there was a man, an Italian man, he lived a homosexual lifestyle, he came back to a normal life, and he said that when his father left his family, that devastated him so much psychologically that basically to fill a need, that void, he started seeking out sexual relations with other men. So there is definitely a correlation between that. And what is the reason because of that is because, well, fathers are not being good fathers.
Right.
So.
Well, in many instances as well, there are times that, because one of the things that people don't realize with the no-fault divorce is that over 70% of them are actually filed by the mother. Mm-hmm. And the way that our system works today, by and large, not always, but by and large, is that the mother who files for divorce almost has an incentive to do so, almost gets rewarded, and in many instances the father is actually, by the laws and by the judges, almost kicked out of the child's life. Yes. Or then if she does get remarried, now you have a stepfather, and or maybe even you have the mother's new husband, and that is not really, no matter how good of a person he is, he does not take the place of his real father. Yeah. What you've said about the males and then going into homosexuality, you also find it happening to the females a little bit differently. They're seeking for love from another male, and what do? They get pregnant outside of wedlock. Yeah. So one of the issues that also takes place with no-fault divorce is an increase of abortions. Yeah. Because not only are you pregnant, but now you don't have the social structure, you don't have the family there to help be a protective unit.
And what you say is correct, because the strongest shield against moral decadence, against unplanned pregnancies, against all these problems we have in society is the family. The family is the bedrock of society. It is the institution by which we are given stability in our lives. We are given a sense of purpose in our lives. We have the help, so when we make mistakes and we do things that are wrong, we can always rely on our family to go to. Right. And so many of the problems of today's society can be traced to broken families, which is why in the name of our organization, one of the words is family. Tradition, family, and property. Right. Because those are the three values of society that are the most under attack by the left and by our moral decadence, and those are the three we have to fight. And even by the legal system, and that is a shame, because the legal system tries to make it look like this is just between two adults. What I've said is that marriage is for the children. Divorce is for the adults, or one adult. Children before adults. In other words, once you have children, you must be committed to your marriage, because marriage is for children. Children should be more important than adults. But you have a whole legal industry, the divorce attorneys. In Texas, we have the Texas Family Law Foundation. Sounds so nice. They are the most anti-family organization that you can imagine. And they think that destroying families it's not that big of a deal, because they're focusing strictly on the adults and they're not talking about the children. Every child needs a mother and a father. Every child needs the loving, nurturing aspect that a mother gives and the strong support of a father in order to have a healthy constitution when he grows up. You need both aspects. If you don't have one or the other, there's going to be an imbalance. And there are some cases where children, they come from those situations and they come out okay, but those are exceptions to the rule.
Right.
You know, and so I think it is very important, and we have to address this. You know, when we're doing pro-life work, for example, we get told all the time from pro-abortion, one of their favorite talking points is that, well, if you claim to be pro-life and you want to save the babies, then you should be focusing on getting, you know, preventing young women from getting pregnant in the first place. So you should be pushing sex education. You should be pushing for welfare programs. You should be pushing for da 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 da. But the thing is, those are only that's just damage control. Really, ultimately, that's just damage control. Why are a bunch of our young women getting pregnant in the first place outside of cases of rape? But why is that happening in the first place? Many of them come from situations where they come from broken families, or families where the parents are not being good examples, where they should be, not giving them moral instruction. And so when they grow up, they make these decisions that end up having terrible consequences.
So when you talked about sex education was largely influenced by the Alfred Kinsey. Now, I don't know what you know about him.
I've heard of him before.
Yeah, but he basically studied male pedophiles in a prison, and he took their behavior and normalized it to say that this is what every male is like. Well, first off, if you're a male pedophile in a prison, you're not a typical male.
Yeah.
But what he has helped to do then, this idea of having a value-free sex education, all you're teaching is the mechanics. But you're not talking about issues of the heart. You're not talking about issues of morality and of the conscience, because he was an immoral person. And people like Hugh Hefner, who helped to push that, immoral person. People like Margaret Sanger, who said, hey, this is a great way as well for the abortion industry, an immoral person. So what's happening in our schools, they're teaching sex education that has been largely founded by immoral people, and they try to call it neutral.
Yes.
But you cannot teach sex education in a neutral manner. You must teach it with the values that it should, that marriage, that sex should be preserved for marriage. It
Absolutely.
should be preserved to a person that you are committed to for your lifetime.
Yeah.
And also knowing that out of this a child may come. That child is not to be killed by abortion. That child is to be raised in an intact home with mother and father. And as you were mentioning, that forms the constitution of the child, the identity of the child. That child should be in the family, not from a split family.
Absolutely.
And to bifurcate their personality is abuse.
Absolutely.
So
it's wrong. It deprives the child of so much opportunities for growth, for a stability, for a loving home and family. I'm not saying that single family households are incapable of providing some sort of love, but it's not going to be the same than if we're having a mother and a father. Right. And I think it's a very, very important issue. And if we don't get to the root, the basics of what the problem is, and even going further, what is causing these no-fault? Why are people in the mentality that, you know, divorce, you can just, marriage is just a contract that you can just, you know, you make and then you break whenever you're, it's convenient to do so. Right. We've cheapened the notion of what marriage means. We have. And it's because we've put our carnal desires, our desires for sexual pleasure, over the serious commitments that marriage involves. Right. You know, the serious, the sacrifices that a married life requires of the two spouses to each other. Right. And I think many people they're not willing to make those sacrifices because they have an adversity towards this kind of the suffering that involves. And I think the other thing is that the state, through their judges, through the laws that are made, will always side with the person who wants to abandon the marital vows. So the state is also an agent, an active agent, because in many of these instances, the person divorced is being divorced against his or her will. The children who are deprived of that family are being deprived of that family against their will, their desire, their wishes. And the state is an active evil participant
in these sorts of things. I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate everything that you said. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And anything about your organization you want to plug once more?
I'd like to say that if you want to know more about the work that we do, please check our website at www.tfb.org, and you will find many good articles and materials on the work that we do and how to continue to fight for the faith, for the family, and for our country.
Thank you so much. Thanks.